The Gaza Strip is a small coastal territory located between Israel and Egypt. This narrow piece of land, only about 25 miles long and 7 miles wide, has been at the heart of one of the most enduring and complex conflicts in modern history. Home to over 2 million Palestinians, Gaza has been a focal point of conflict for decades. The population density is among the highest in the world, leading to significant challenges in terms of living conditions and resource management. The region has witnessed numerous wars and countless smaller clashes between Israel and Palestinian militant groups, primarily Hamas, which controls Gaza. These conflicts have left deep scars on the landscape and the people who live there. This cycle of violence has resulted in immense suffering for civilians on both sides. Families have been torn apart, homes destroyed, and communities left in ruins. The psychological impact on children and adults alike is profound and long-lasting. The root causes of the conflict are complex and deeply entrenched. Historical grievances, religious significance, and nationalistic fervor all play a role in perpetuating the strife. They include disputes over land, resources, and the right of Palestinians to a sovereign state. The question of borders, the status of Jerusalem, and the right of return for Palestinian refugees are particularly contentious issues. The situation is further complicated by the presence of extremist groups on both sides, who often exploit the conflict to advance their own agendas. These groups use violence and fear to maintain their influence and disrupt any attempts at peace. The international community has long sought a peaceful resolution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, but progress has been elusive. Various peace initiatives and diplomatic efforts have been undertaken, yet a lasting solution remains out of reach. Countless rounds of negotiations have failed to bridge the deep divides between the two sides. Trust is in short supply, and each failed attempt only seems to deepen mistrust and animosity. As a result, the people of Gaza have endured years of hardship, poverty, and violence, with little hope for a brighter future. The blockade imposed by Israel and Egypt has severely restricted the movement of people and goods, exacerbating the humanitarian crisis. The ongoing humanitarian crisis in Gaza is a stark reminder of the human cost of this enduring conflict. International aid organizations struggle to provide relief amidst the constant threat of renewed violence. The Strip faces severe shortages of essential goods, including food, water, and medicine. The infrastructure is in a state of disrepair, and access to clean water and electricity is limited and unreliable. The healthcare system is on the brink of collapse and unemployment is rampant. Hospitals are overwhelmed, lacking the necessary supplies and equipment to treat the injured and sick. The people of Gaza are trapped in a cycle of poverty and despair with no end in sight. Despite the dire circumstances, the resilience and spirit of the Gazan people continue to shine through as they hold on to hope for a peaceful and prosperous future. Donald Trump's election as President of the United States in 2016 ushered in a new era for American foreign policy, particularly in the Middle East. His victory was seen as a seismic shift, not just domestically, but also on the global stage. Many were curious and anxious about how his unconventional style would translate into international diplomacy. Trump's approach to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict differed significantly from his predecessors. Unlike the more cautious and multilateral strategies of past administrations, Trump opted for a bold and direct approach. He believed that his business acumen and deal-making skills could bring a fresh perspective to one of the world's most intractable conflicts. He promised a deal of the century that would finally bring peace to the region. This ambitious plan was met with both hope and skepticism. Supporters saw it as a long-overdue initiative, while critics doubted its feasibility and fairness. The plan aimed to address key issues such as borders, security, and the status of Jerusalem. Trump's approach was characterized by a departure from traditional diplomacy. He often bypassed established diplomatic channels, preferring instead to engage directly with leaders. This unorthodox method was both praised for its boldness and criticized for its unpredictability. He downplayed the importance of multilateral negotiations and instead focused on building personal relationships with key leaders. This strategy was evident in his interactions with leaders from around the world, where he emphasized personal rapport over formal agreements. This approach was evident in his close ties with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. The two leaders shared a mutual admiration and a common vision for the region. Their relationship was a cornerstone of Trump's Middle East policy. Trump's administration also took a number of controversial actions that were seen as favoring Israel. These actions included recognizing Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights and cutting aid to Palestinian refugees. Each move was met with both applause and outrage, reflecting the deep divisions in the region. This included recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel and moving the US embassy there, a move that drew widespread condemnation from the international community. The decision was seen as a significant shift in US policy and was met with protests and diplomatic backlash. Despite these actions, Trump maintained that he was committed to achieving a peaceful resolution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. He argued that his bold moves were necessary to break the stalemate and create new opportunities for peace. He appointed his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, to lead the administration's peace efforts. Kushner was tasked with the monumental challenge of negotiating peace in a region fraught with historical grievances and deep-seated mistrust. Kushner, a real estate developer with no prior diplomatic experience, embarked on a series of meetings with Israeli and Arab leaders. His efforts were both lauded for their ambition and criticized for their lack of experience. The success of these efforts remains a topic of debate, but they undeniably marked a new chapter in US foreign policy. Trump's approach to diplomacy was unconventional, to say the least. His methods often defied traditional diplomatic norms and practices, making him a polarizing figure on the global stage. He often relied on his skills as a businessman to try and broker deals. Trump's background in real estate and business negotiations heavily influenced his diplomatic style, emphasizing deal-making over long-term alliances. He believed in using leverage and applying pressure to get what he wanted. This approach was evident in his dealings with both allies and adversaries, where he frequently used economic sanctions and tariffs as tools of persuasion. One of Trump's key tactics was his willingness to make bold pronouncements and take unilateral actions. His America First policy often led to decisions that prioritized US interests, sometimes at the expense of international cooperation. This often caught other world leaders off guard and created a sense of uncertainty that he could then exploit. His unpredictable nature became a strategic advantage, keeping opponents and allies alike on their toes. For example, his decision to withdraw from the Iran nuclear deal was met with mixed reactions, but it ultimately allowed him to renegotiate terms more favorable to the United States. This move was seen as a bold step that challenged the status quo and demonstrated his willingness to take risks. Another hallmark of Trump's diplomacy was his emphasis on personal relationships. He often sought to build direct connections with foreign leaders, believing that personal rapport could lead to more effective negotiations. He believed that building rapport with foreign leaders was essential to achieving his goals. This approach was evident in his meetings with leaders from both friendly and adversarial nations. This was evident in his interactions with leaders like Vladimir Putin of Russia and Kim Jong-un of North Korea. These high-profile meetings were often marked by a mix of cordiality and tension, reflecting the complex nature of international diplomacy. However, critics argued that Trump's approach was often impulsive and lacked a clear strategy. They contended that his decisions were sometimes made on a whim, without thorough analysis or consultation with experts. They pointed to his tendency to make decisions based on gut feeling rather than careful consideration of all the facts. This approach, while sometimes yielding quick results, also led to unpredictable and often controversial outcomes. This, they argued, led to a number of foreign policy blunders. Critics cited instances where his lack of a coherent strategy resulted in diplomatic setbacks and strained relationships with long-standing allies. Despite these criticisms, Trump's unique style of diplomacy left an indelible mark on international relations, reshaping the way the world viewed American leadership. Section 4. Building relationships, Trump's Middle Eastern allies. Trump understood the importance of strong alliances in the Middle East. He cultivated close relationships with key players in the region, including Israel, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt. He saw these countries as vital partners in his efforts to counter Iranian influence and combat terrorism. Trump's relationship with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was particularly close. The two leaders shared similar worldviews and often echoed each other's rhetoric. Trump's decision to move the US embassy to Jerusalem was seen as a major concession to Netanyahu and a demonstration of the strength of the US-Israel alliance. Trump also worked to strengthen ties with Saudi Arabia, a country he viewed as a bulwark against Iranian expansionism. He secured lucrative arms deals with the Saudis and defended their human rights record, even in the face of international outcry over the murder of journalist Jamal Khashoggi. These alliances were not without their critics. Some argued that Trump's close ties to Israel and Saudi Arabia came at the expense of the Palestinian cause and undermined efforts to achieve a two-state solution. Section 5. The pressure mounts. International calls for peace. As tensions continued to simmer in Gaza, the international community grew increasingly concerned about the potential for a full-scale conflict. The United Nations, the European Union, and various world leaders called for restraint and urged both sides to engage in dialogue. The humanitarian situation in Gaza, already dire, deteriorated further as a result of the ongoing conflict. The United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees in the Near East, or UNRWA, warned of a looming humanitarian catastrophe and called for increased international aid. Despite the calls for peace, violence continued to flare up. Rocket attacks from Gaza into Israel were met with retaliatory airstrikes, resulting in civilian casualties on both sides. The cycle of violence threatened to spiral out of control. The international community struggled to find a way to break the deadlock. Some advocated for a more assertive approach, including the imposition of sanctions on Israel, while others argued for continued dialogue and diplomacy. Please subscribe to our channel for more insightful content on global politics and current events.